Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian. We're here in Northern Virginia to talk to the two of the folks who are instrumental in the Center for a New American Security's new Future Foundry report. Bill Lynn, former Deputy Defense Secretary, CEO of DRS Technologies, obviously a Leonardo company in the United States, and also one of the sponsors of the report, and Ben FitzGerald, who's the Director of the Technology Program at CNAS. Gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Vago. It's great to be here.
Bill, let me start with you. What was the key? I mean, what are you guys trying to achieve with this report?
Well, Vago, I think what we were trying to do was lay out for a new administration the forces we see coming together on the defense industrial base. We see a series of things moving the industrial base. One is a greater consolidation, particularly at the platform level. A second is the globalization of the industry, more and more international companies participating in the defense marketplace. And a third, and probably most important, is the commercialization of the technology. More and more of the technology that's used in the defense arena is coming out of the commercial space. So we were trying to look at those three forces and understand how that was going to affect the defense industrial marketplace and what a new administration might do to help shape that.
Ben?
I think that's exactly right. This project builds on a project we did 2 years ago called Creative Disruption, again with Bill and the team, where we sort of described the problem. And that problem has not changed over the last 2 years. What we wanted to do here was try to create a positive vision for what a new administration could do about it, rather than continuing to sort of admire the problem.
The admiration of the problem. It is a much admired problem,
Indeed.
But it's also a very hard problem. I mean, when you were deputy, Bill, worked on this issue a lot. You know, the relationship with the defense industrial base was important. You helped start the sector-by-sector review of the supply origin. You know, where are the choke points in supply for the defense acquisition and procurement systems? What are do you think, have to be some of the priorities for the incoming team as they think about the defense-industrial relationship?
Well, I think they need to think about several things. One, they need to think about lowering the barriers to entry for commercial firms, either directly with the Department of Defense, reducing some of the regulatory burdens, some of the accounting burdens that are involved in doing business with the Department of Defense. Also to encourage partnerships between defense firms and commercial firms. That's already happening in the marketplace, but I think it's in the Defense Department's interest to encourage that kind of behavior.
Ben?
I think that's exactly right. One of the things that we outline in the Future Foundry report is that the Department of Defense has something of a monolithic approach to industry policy, when there's actually 4 separate segments that they need to look at, which is looking at military unique systems with sort of constrained competition, aircraft carriers, nuclear weapons, military unique systems with viable competition, combat aircraft, and then a fourth one, which is commercial technology. But we're missing a third, which is we don't have a formal sort of policy or process for military adapted commercial technology. And if we don't go after that, we're not going to have a defense basis to allow the kind of industry collaboration that Bill's talking about.
You know, defense innovation has been one of the hallmarks of the administration, obviously constrained by the Budget Control Act. That's what sparked Bob Work, for example, to talk about the third offset strategy, right? To offset the gains by future adversaries in a fiscally constrained environment where you're going to have to make choices and how you can get the best bang for your dollar. There's now almost a universal sense that the new administration is looking at more. That was one of the themes over at the Reagan Forum, in fact, was, one of the panels I moderated was this question that the new incoming team is going to be focused on just getting more things, propelled by an increasing budget, scrapping of the Budget Control Act. How important is it that some of the innovation initiatives that began in the Obama administration, that began when you joined the administration, in fact, should survive into the future?
Well, I think the most important thing are not specific initiatives, but more the underlying dynamic is the Defense Department has more and more become a net importer of technology, whereas before a lot of technology was developed inside the Defense Department or inside the defense industrial base, things like GPS, even the internet itself, and then exported to the commercial world. More and more we're seeing a reversal of that, whether it's 3D printing or nanotechnology, information technology itself. And so the challenge is, how do you import that technology and operationalize it for defense purposes? I think that's been driving the initiatives in the Obama administration. I think it will continue to drive things in the Trump administration. They may do things differently, but they need to respond to that dynamic.
I mean, it's a return. Well, go ahead, Ben.
No, I think that sort of the reform or rebuild question is something of a false binary. We need to do both. I think that if we look at the work of the current administration, and equally importantly, the work of the HASC and the SASC with the last 2 NDAAs, there's a real window of opportunity to make some sort of generational changes, which are critically important. If you can do that in combination with removing the BCA and increasing defense funding, that's a really sort of amazing opportunity.
But this is a return, really, to the historic natural order of the universe, isn't it? I mean, we had a Defense Department that was leading technological innovation, in large part because of World War II, the buildup, the unique circumstances throughout the Cold War. Whereas if you look at it historically, the Pentagon wasn't inventing the car any more than it was inventing the airplane. It was just figuring out clever ways of getting into a virtuous cycle where its involvement in some of these things helped advance the state of the art in technology, didn't it?
Yes, I mean, I think there's always a balance between where the technology is developed. I think we've gone through a period where more of it was developed inside the defense industrial base. We're now moving, as you say, back to a period where more of it's outside. In my mind, the key is how do we gain the benefit of that technology for our warfighters? That has to be the focus of the Defense Department.
Yeah, I very rarely disagree with Bill, and I'm not going to do so here. The other thing that I would add, though, is that the department has to adapt itself in order to sort of capitalize on that global trend. And that's what we've not seen successfully over the last 20 or so years. The good work done by the current administration has seen a lot of sort of innovation efforts around the organization. We're going to need to see that come back into the core sort of bureaucratic functions of the department if we're going to go after these opportunities at scale.
Full disclosure, I was part of a number of folks who did talk to you during this this whole thing, and there were other reporters, obviously, who were involved in that process as well. And some of the discussions were about getting into the technical mechanics of how to do this. From your standpoint, what are some of the things the department can do in order that the new team can do to actually set the conditions, right, so that it's not on the periphery of the organization, but actually coded into the organization?
So first, I think we need to view the military technical superiority of the United States Department of Defense as a matter of strategy. It needs to be something that the Deputy Secretary worries about daily and something that the Secretary pays constant attention to as well. But in terms of specific actions, we think looking at industrial-based policy in a more nuanced fashion, as I mentioned earlier, investing in a different strategic approach, so looking at what we're calling an optionality strategy, investing in more systems in small numbers, and then looking at ways to put more competition into the acquisition system, both bureaucratically and then by making more investments.
Bill, you spent a little bit of time out, engaging with industry, commercial industry as well when you were deputy. You've watched this effort now from outside government. What do you think are the keys to attract some of these Silicon Valley and some of these innovative companies to come and do business with the department directly? I mean, sometimes some of these companies have some trepidation about doing business with the big defense primes themselves. As you guys are trying to harness these relationships, there are some trust questions. They're convinced that the big guys are always trying to steal their ideas. That's what some of them have told me directly. What are some of the keys to actually doing this? Because as a lot of my Silicon Valley friends have told me, we'll always take a meeting with the department. We'll never say no, but it doesn't necessarily mean we're ready to start to do business with the department. What has to change fundamentally to get this kind of two-way street going the way I think everybody acknowledges has to go, given what the future threats are and the challenges?
Well, as I said at the outset, I think a major thing that needs to be done is reducing the barriers to entry, reducing the need for a separate accounting system just to do business with the Department of Defense, to all the regulations, all the auditing. I mean, it's done for good purpose, but it's overdone. And one of the ways of doing that is for the department to reduce those barriers itself. That may be the harder way. Another way is to partner with defense companies who already have black belts in doing business with the Department of Defense, and that may offer some opportunities. A second important thing that's true not just for commercial companies but for defense companies as well is we need more stability and predictability in the defense budget, and that means repealing the sequester. You can't plan in the defense world if you don't know what your budget is 18 months from now, and that's the world we've lived in since the sequester. We need to get away from that.
And you also, as I recall, had a lifetime on the Hill, where you were a key staffer. Obviously John McCain, but as well as Jack Reed and Mac Thornberry and Adam Smith on the authorization committees have been interested in reform. They've been pushing through a series of reforms. Do you think the climate is right that Congress will actually lead on these kinds of reforms? Because ultimately all of this oversight and auditing and everything was put in place because at some point somebody did something wrong, and the response to that was, okay, well, we have to get much more invasive in auditing. We have to put specific stipulations in. Do you actually think that the political climate is ripe to actually make some of these sweeping changes that everybody has said? Because ultimately, Congress has 535. The Pentagon has a board of directors of 535.
Reform has to be a partnership. It can't be done just by Congress. It can't be done by the Department of Defense without Congress. So I think what you're seeing with Thornberry and McCain and their efforts is a willingness on those committees to look at reform, indeed an encouragement from them. I think what you need now to see is, and it's still early days, how the Trump administration is going to react to that. Are they going to grab the mantle of reform? I think, as I said, I think they have a willing partner in Congress. Some of the things they've said suggest that they are going to pursue that. I think it's still too early for them to say exactly what lines of reform they want to proceed down, but I think the door is open.
I want to ask you one last question. Obviously, you're the CEO of an important company that services the U.S. Prime contractors, but is a prime in your own right. The president-elect has made sort of two high-profile tweets recently, one about Air Force One and how that program's out of control. Obviously, that's a nascent effort that's just getting underway to replace the president's transport fleet, obviously, with a more capable aircraft. And then we had also the tweet about, the F-35 program is being out of control. I know that was one of your priorities when you were deputy, along with Ash Carter, to sort of figure out how to get that program back on track. More broadly, what's the kind of relationship that this incoming administration needs with the defense industrial base ultimately? Because there are some folks who are looking at it and saying, wow, Lockheed took a hammering on stock price, Boeing took a hammering on stock price with some of these tweets, and there is a little bit of concern about what that defense industrial relationship needs to look like. In as much as you're willing to talk about it, what are some of the concerns? But what do you think are the opportunities and the approach that needs to exist for there to be a successful partnership between essentially the companies that are the armorers of the nation ultimately?
And I think the nature of transitions is to magnify early statements because you don't have a track record. The administration isn't even in office yet. So they haven't built a defense budget. They haven't built a defense program. They're going to build at least 4 defense budgets, 4 defense programs. I think we should take a breath and wait until we see exactly what kinds of things they're going to propose, not just in the first year, but over the course of the administration. So I think the focus ought to be really on the longer term rather than statements in the transition.
But what do you think the relationship has to be? I mean, when you started, there was a little bit of concern that the Bush administration was not engaging with defense contractors as closely. When you guys took office, there was a view of, we have to engage and harness the ecosystem. I mean, obviously, there were some people in the industry that thought that the Obama administration was being unfair in terms of targeting profits and things like that. What do you think are the keys to having a successful relationship?
I mean, I think that transparency, communication are the keys. I think you need to have discussion. You don't always have to agree, but each side needs to know what the other side's positions are and have the opportunity to explain. And then the decision ultimately comes down to what the administration wants to do and what Congress will approve. But I think getting inputs, and not just from industry, but from people like Ben, from Congress, and from the broader public, and that'll be key to setting a broad-based strategy, program, and budget.
Let me ask one quick question to the both of you. Obviously, some of the reforms that have taken place, have targeted, for example, Frank Kendall's job as the Undersecretary of Technology for Acquisition, Undersecretary for Acquisition Technology and Logistics, to break it up into a technology undersecretaryship and then as well as an acquisition and a sustainment secretaryship. How significant of a change is that? And is that, as some people fear, that is going to set the department back? What's your guys' view of some of the changes that have been enacted and whether or not they're going to pay the kind of positive fruit that I think everybody expects? Let me start with you, Ben.
Look, it's really hard to tell at this point. Because it's going to come down to who are the people who have those jobs, what does the change management look like, and is the new system going to be more or less effective? We don't know any of those things. The thing that we know is that we're in the middle of a window of opportunity for change. We've seen leadership from the Hill, we've seen a president-elect who's signaled an intent to change, and those are all positive things. As Bill says, it has to be a partnership though. Clearly there's a willing partner on the Hill. Remains to be seen what the Department of Defense is going to do. And we can't forget the role of defense industry as a change agent in here as well. In our report, we lay out, ideally, DoD will lead change supported by Congress. If that doesn't happen, and history tells us it's unlikely to happen, then defense industry needs to look at the ways in which it can adapt, and there's significant opportunity there as well.
On the AT&L question, Congress, I think, took a bit of a step back and is waiting to see how the new administration is going to react. I think that two things would strengthen the acquisition oversight. One is to ensure that we do have acquisition oversight at the departmental level. There is a role for some senior, the number 3 official, being acquisition, that you do not push acquisition back to the services as some have suggested. We've tried that. I don't think so you want to maintain a strong acquisition official. I think the other dynamic is to remove some of the other ancillary, other duties that have been aggregated with the AT&L job would probably be constructive in terms of helping that position focus on acquisition and leave environment or other issues to another official or other officials.
And obviously then whoever takes over the AT&L job has to be a veteran acquisition guy in the mold of, say, a Frank Kendall, who is intimately familiar with the issues, the management, and all the other challenges that go with it.
Yes, and in fact that's required by law.
Well, I was just putting that question to you, but gentlemen, thanks very, very much. Really appreciate it, and have a great holiday.
Thanks, Vago.
Thanks, Vago.